Hello, friends. Welcome to another edition of the SoMAcast. I'm Landon Whitsitt, executive of the Synod of Mid-America. With me, as always, is our capable co-host, Brian Ellison, the State Clerk of the Synod. Brian, how are you?
I am good, Landon. How are you today?
I am great. It has stopped raining here in Kansas City. You know that. You also live in Kansas City. I'm excited for the sun.
Indeed. The sun is beautiful today, and there's a park not far from my house that people yesterday were actually out canoeing on. That's a pandemic response to a bit of rain, but it had formed a lake in Gillum Park here in Kansas City.
That's outstanding.
Yeah.
I just bake bread. I'm not going to do the canoeing thing. That's not where I'm at.
I think that's you should stick to where your gifts and your calling lie.
Are you going to go get a canoe?
No, that is also not where my gifts and calling lie.
I'm telling you, I would love to see you in a canoe. That would be one of my, that's a life goal for me right now.
There actually is a famous story of my partner and I, a two-person kayaking outing that was very nearly the end of our relationship quite early. And perhaps you can just fill in the blanks and use your imagination.
It's one of my favorite stories. Okay, we're not going to make you relive that trauma.
Thank you.
Because we have more important things to do.
I don't need that.
No, you don't. We have more important things to do today, and those important things involve talking to our guests. Friends, we are excited to welcome this week the Reverend Jamie Butcher, who is the Associate Pastor for Discipleship and Formation at, oh my gosh, I completely forgot which church you at. First Presbyterian in Atlanta? First Presbyterian in Atlanta. Jamie, thanks so much for taking time to be with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Good. Yeah, you're our friend Aisha, who we spoke with last week, and your head of staff, Tony, both you come highly recommended. So you've got a bar that you need to clear is what I'm trying to tell you.
I can't let them down. I got it.
So friends, we decided to ask Jamie to join us today because one of the things that Jamie is responsible for there at First Pres is running a small groups ministry, helping the members of that congregation journey together in intimate ways. And we considered that in this time after pandemic, when we still don't have a vaccine and there are still these social distancing regulations in place, one of the things that's going to be a reality for us is that groups of 10 or less is going to be the norm for a long time. And there are folks such as Jamie who are already thinking through and have already thought through how to help small groups of people be together, disciple one another, be discipled, and grow spiritually. And we thought this is a great wealth of wisdom that we've got that the rest of us are going to need to know. So, Jamie, we're excited to hear what you and your colleagues and the members that you all serve have been thinking about. We know that Georgia was one of the first places to start the opening up. So I'm sure you all are already having those kinds of conversations. Are you all already coming back to some sort of in-person something or other?
We are not. We have put a task force together that's composed of members of the congregation who have expertise in these areas, doctors, some public health people, pediatrician. We're in Atlanta, so there's CDC folks, everywhere. So we're very lucky to have those people who are part of a team that are working to offer recommendations for our return. And they have a pretty exhaustive list of what they're looking at in order for us to get back together on campus. We are doing some small groups that are meeting kind of on a back porch of somebody's house if they want to. There's possibility of outdoor worship in July, but by and large, we're waiting on the recommendations of that task force and won't be back together until August at least. In Georgia, we're also still under, if you're in a vulnerable class, you're still under shelter in place, so you're still restricted.
I'm curious, Jamie, if people are reacting particularly negatively to this idea that they need to stay apart. Obviously, the folks who are more involved in the world of public health probably have a deeper understanding of that. But in a lot of our churches around here, even well-meaning folks, even people who are generally thoughtful about the needs of the community, they are still chomping at the bit to get back together, and in many cases are making choices to try to, I don't know, kind of push those boundaries. Are you finding that as well?
There are a variety of responses with the churches in Atlanta, as I'm sure you can understand. I think within our congregation, people are open to the recommendations of these experts. So we've been lucky in that way. Plus, we're a larger church, and we have continued to provide tons of ministry, whether that's virtually or through our live streaming. We have some audio visual staff that have just been incredibly helpful. We've continued with our community ministries, although in a reduced form. So in a lot of ways, we have continued to operate, even if it looks differently. And I know we're lucky to be able to do that because we are a larger church, and so it's not all falling on any one person's plate. And I think that's helped people be more patient as we're waiting to hear from these folks with their expertise. We also have a number of folks who are in the vulnerable classes, 65 plus, or people with underlying health conditions. Right. So they're aware intimately of what it might mean to come back too soon.
Yes. And this, at least I'm in Kansas City, but I see the stuff that you all are producing. I just watched the sermon that Aisha preached during the midweek service the other day. I mean, what a gift to be able to see good preachers, good ministers from all across the country, specifically Atlanta. That's been, I think, one of the beauties of this time. God makes a way out of horrible situations, and that has certainly been for me. One of the beautiful things that God has done. So in addition to this task force, what are the other ways that you and the staff and the members are thinking about approaching this coming back? Do you have a list of criteria? I know that various health departments, certainly the CDC, has put things out. What are some specific things that you all are doing?
Well, our task force does have a list of things they're looking for. I am not on that task force, so I can't speak to their conversations, but what they have published are some metrics around gating guidelines, insurance, and compliance.
Did you say dating guidelines?
Gating.
My mistake. Sorry, not dating guidelines. That's totally a different department in the
right.
In the church
That's
structure.
usually
it's
only
a different
two
podcast.
People, so,
right, okay,
different podcast.
Easier.
Yeah. Sorry.
Operational logistics and programming, so what it would actually look like, as well as communications and messaging and finances, what it would cost to operate, with additional masks and hand sanitizer at our regular capabilities. So we are, in a brave new world, and it is certainly a transitional time where what comes next is not something that any of us have really seen or lived through before. So a different time for sure.
I'm curious. Your ministry obviously works with small groups and kind of discipleship, and a particular aspect of this moment is that we can't gather as the large group that a lot of us identify most closely with as church. It's when we all get together usually on Sunday morning, sing hymns, listen to a sermon. That is church for so many people. But you have long before this been representing the idea that church is actually where two or three are gathered. It is where these small groups meet. I guess I'm curious how this time of sort of forcing us to meet in nothing larger than a small group is intersecting with your sense of call to ministry and the work that you've been doing a long time.
Yeah, that's great. I love doing small group ministry. I love the intimacy and the relationships. I love the opportunity to listen that comes to pastors and leaders when they're in smaller groups. So I am excited for folks who may be engaging in smaller group ministry in ways that they haven't before. I think it's incredibly fruitful and will be meaningful time, particularly as we're coming out of such a traumatic season for our community together. And I have some tips for folks who might find themselves in smaller groups. I will say I have enjoyed the Zoom life of small groups immensely. I really have. I've enjoyed almost all of our groups just transferred to Zoom, with maybe a little extra technological help to get people on board. But the one thing that I have really enjoyed, and I've told my groups this and kind of laughed about it, is the mute all button. I mean, what
That's
power.
my favorite button as a host.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So now, efficiency won't come quite as easily when we return in person. But I do have some tips that I think people can use, and also I hope they'll enjoy being in smaller groups.
When you are on these Zoom calls, have you found that you've had an increase in participation? I know that in a lot of cases, pastors are saying that certainly for Sunday morning worship, there's an increase in participation. Are you finding that in your groups as well?
Yes, we certainly, when we were all under stay-at-home orders, kind of at the beginning of the crisis, people really were looking for connection and were eager to get back to being with their neighbors, even if it was virtual. So we had incredible participation. Now in Georgia, we have been off of stay-at-home orders, unless you're in the vulnerable class, for I think around 4 weeks. And I do think attendance has dipped now that people are traveling a little more. And another thing that I saw that was incredible and to see virtually, and I think related to this particular situation of pandemic, is when we created content that was specific to the reality of this season. We also got great turnout. I'm doing an Enneagram small group that wraps up next week on the Enneagram and stress, and have folks from Ohio, South Carolina, of course, Georgia, Tennessee. So that's been exciting to see even these smaller group offerings expand to friends and neighbors and people who just got tagged on the post on Facebook.
Yeah.
When you said you have specific tips for small group ministry on in this age, in Zoom, for example. I've in fact, we've even shared videos from the Synod. I've given a lot of lessons on tips for using Zoom in presbytery meetings and congregational meetings, and how to vote, how to do those things. I'm curious, is that the kind of tips you mean? You have like logistical tips for what makes a small group work on Zoom that maybe you wouldn't think about if it were a in real life meeting?
I think so. Although honestly, I think these tips work for Zoom, or they work for smaller group gatherings in real life. Just some ways to structure your meeting that I found, because this is my primary ministry area, have found to be really helpful. And when I'm thinking about a small group, I do have like a working definition. And what I think of with the small group is that it's anywhere between 6 and 20 people. So not necessarily small. I mean, 20 is not that small. And I've even had up to 25. But the idea that these are groups that are approaching faith formation through study, through prayer, but emphasis is placed on lay leadership and on a commitment to the group. So I think it really is a different experience as a leader. You're really approaching the organization and the structure and the format and the content differently if you're thinking of it as a group that encourages lay leadership, commitment, that's remembering the prayer life and the well-being of the individuals, rather than delivering content as some of the larger group lectures might, which I enjoy those too. But for me, the real, I encounter God so clearly and easily in those small groups.
Well, and also just how many pastors right now feel like they've become television producers, and it's been all about how do I deliver the content that everyone expects of me. But you're thinking about it through a very different lens, which I think might be beneficial to those pastors as well.
Good.
Yeah, it really feels like this will give us an opportunity, and when I say us, those of us who are ordained to the ministry of word and sacrament, teaching elders, the opportunity to really do some of that teaching and equipping the congregation members under our care. I mean, we know. I spoke to a friend of mine the other day who is a ruling elder at a local congregation. And he wanted to just let me know. He's like, here's what we've been doing on Sunday. And he talked me through the order of worship that he and his family go through. And I said, you're living out your ordination as an elder. I mean, that's exactly clearly your pastor is teaching you well, because you are living that out. And it feels to me like this is a really good opportunity, maybe for the beginnings of this dismantling of the professionalization of what we call the clergy class.
Amen.
So when you got folks that are coming back in, you had really great participation on Zoom. You're starting to have some in-person meetings, albeit maybe small. What do you do when you get back, especially when you realize you've had a really good experience on the Zoom? You don't want to say, okay, well, that was great, we're done with that.
Yeah.
What do you do? How do you think through that?
Sure. I think first off, follow the guidelines of your, if there's a task force that's recommending or you're checking out CDC, make sure that you're going to be safe. Health and safety is priority. And I also think that an important question to ask when we do begin to gather is who is not there, who hasn't been able to attend in this format that you're now offering. And that could be for a number of reasons. We are all going to have very personal and different experiences of this pandemic that is affecting people in racial and socioeconomic and whether they're able-bodied or not, affecting them very differently. So there may be some people who are not comfortable showing up, who you would need to just be mindful of. And again, this is a place where you can encourage lay leadership to get involved. Why aren't these people here? Why aren't the folks that we saw on Zoom or people that we might have seen last year, are they restricted because public transportation is restricted? Do they not have childcare? Have they been sick or caring for someone who's sick? So I think we just need to be mindful of those of us who are able to get back to normal and are super jazzed to do that, of course. Not everyone is, for a number of reasons. So in order to be the church that we are, and to follow the God that we follow, we want to be mindful that everyone is invited to that table, and we may not have made it possible for everyone to be there in our eagerness to get back if we can. So to just be aware of that, who isn't there as we're gathering. And kind of a flip side of that is I do think there's going to be some new opportunities, that new affinity groups will rise up out of this experience for people who have been restricted because they are living in an independent living center or retirement home. I mean, their experience is radical and different. And I imagine a group of those people together, sharing about how their faith brought them through this, sharing about how, what was sad, what they lamented, and also how they grew. I imagine a group like that could get a lot of traction. Similarly, if there are people who have had an experience with COVID-19, whether that's themselves or with family members, they're going to need to have a space, a sacred space, to share some of those stories. And I imagine some new affinity groups will pop up out of this experience.
I'm curious about that, actually, and about and maybe for those who don't have kind of that dramatic contact with COVID-19, but who, are there topics that come to mind for you that you see? You may not return to working your way through Romans in your small group. I mean, what do you imagine might be the topical approach that some of these small groups take as they regather in light of what has happened? And is it different than a pastor who's trying to decide on a sermon series, let's say, for when they return? What are you thinking about?
Thanks for that question. I think that is really going to be an opportunity of this time. And content is definitely something to think about. I would also say, outside of content, one of the most important things will be, and this is with whatever group you're engaging with, is that you structure your time with an opening check-in. Now, I know that can feel a little uncomfortable for a leader of a group who's thinking, I want to honor people's time and get out of here in an hour, and I don't have time to listen to, the details of every person's individual experience.
What is this hour you speak of? I don't even,
Yeah.
what is time, Jamie? Time doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, I know these, and when you're coming off of the Zoom life where you really could run an efficient meeting, with a click of a button, but I do think it's going to be vitally important. We can get caught up as a church, and we should be thinking about the metrics and the logistics and the movement and a return to safety and the liturgy and the singing, and we need to be thinking about that. But I come from a chaplaincy background, from a care background, and what we need to be thinking about the most is about our people and their understanding of the presence of God in this time. And in order to do that, I think this ability for people to check in and share their stories is going to be just life-changing during this season. I mean, typically when I run small groups, that can run the gamut of some really heavy stuff, or, I got my hair cut and took my dog to the vet. But this is a case where we're coming out of a significant season, and our experience of it is going to be a story that we will want to share. A grief shared is a grief healed is a quote that I don't know who to attribute to other than my CPE supervisor. But I think that's really true. We're going to need to talk about this. And something I also want to highlight is our experiences are going to be super different. Some people may have had a brush with death where they've been the sickest they've ever been in their life, whether they're, 70 or 40. And other people will have been to the lake a bunch, So we're going to have really different experiences of this time. But I think it's going to be important for us to allow the stories to be heard and to seek unity in Christ. One of the metaphors that's guiding me at this moment is thinking about how we encounter God in the stranger, right? And we see that in Scripture, from Jacob wrestling to the followers walking down the road of Emmaus, and what isn't until they sit down with Jesus that they realize that's who it is that's been talking to them this whole way. So we encounter God when we hear the stories of who we thought were strangers, but then also this idea of making ourselves the other, of allowing ourselves to feel strange. So allowing other people's experiences of this pandemic to be heard. And if they're incredibly different than our own because of race, socioeconomics, because of health issues, we need to put ourselves in a position of the other and trust that we will encounter God there as well. Brian McLaren has a new book out that talks about Muhammad and Buddha and Jesus crossing the road, something like this, interfaith relationships. And he talks about how Abraham and Sarah's call, that initial pilgrimage, is one of othering themselves, of putting themselves away from their family identity, away from away from their religious identity, and being ready to receive God. So I think that is going to be something that might feel hard for leaders. If you're sitting in a room with somebody that hasn't been out of their house because they were sick and they've been very careful, and someone that has been to their mountain house 15 times, and hanging out with their family that lives nearby, it can feel uncomfortable that we've had such different experiences. But I think we really need to encourage people to be ready to hear and to even be uncomfortable in feeling that their experience isn't the only one, that we've had different stories of this time.
Yeah, I've noticed that of the groups that I am responsible for facilitating, the ones who have had, I won't say the easiest time, but I think the ones who have shown a real resilience and strength during this time were the ones who already had a practice of checking in with one another every time they gathered. I gather the groups of Presbyterian leaders in our synod. That's a practice that they have. That is a strong group. And they have been able to tackle this time in a way that they otherwise would not have, because they know one another intimately. They're able to ask about one another's moms, right? How's that kid doing? You were a little sick there. How's that one church doing? They're able to do those things, and they're able to come together. I really hope that that's something that we really see as a benefit moving forward.
Yeah, and there are some Zoom tips on how to make that happen that we can carry forward when we aren't meeting virtually, whether that's the breakout rooms and you pair people for a monologue. Or I like to use something called the repeating invitation, which is where you just give a sentence with a blank. So from last night, a group I led, we said, the place where I encounter God is blank. And you just one person repeats that invitation, and the speaker answers. The first person says, thank you, and then repeats the invitation. The speaker answers, the other person says, thank you. So it's a way to allow the speaker to have more time, kind of to focus on their response, than a typical kind of conversational back and forth or even a monologue in such a directed way. But you also get to honor the person who's listening, who is asking the invitation, who is saying thank you for sharing. So there are some, things that we can play with as we get back together that we have explored while we're on Zoom.
Yeah. Honestly, this is so good, Jamie, because I think no pastor can walk away from this conversation and say they don't have any ideas for. I mean, you've given a year's worth of ideas for discipleship groups or small groups to gather around. I guess I'm curious. I mean, not to change the subject, we can say more about that. But what about you? You're a person in ministry at a incredibly challenging time. The stresses on you are maybe different than some of your colleagues who have different jobs, different pieces of the responsibility. But how are you taking care of yourself? What is nourishing to you? How many small groups a week do you go to?
Yeah, a lot of small groups. One of the things though that I really lean into, I'll get back to the more personal question, but
Sure.
Is the lay leadership piece of these smaller groups. And I did just pass off kind of the running of the show for one of the moms groups I do to some of the people who have been together now for over a year. They can do it. They have the skills to do it, and you can support them in doing that so that you're not feeling overwhelmed. And I think it's important too that they're able to ask for prayer and to collect the prayer of others.
That's great.
Yeah, and I think personally, I mean, it's a tough season. I am able to say that. I think that we are in this liminal phase in our world where we are being stripped bare of some of the things we relied on. That's quoting Saint Jerome, who talks about the desert as a place that strips us bare. And we are in a desert season, searching for new ways of encountering God. I think one of the ways that I have appreciated my experience of this time is with my neighborhood. It's interesting when your witness is not within your congregation and we're stuck at home. So this is who we're interacting with. But I have a friend who was terribly, terribly sick and was having some neurological responses to a virus in her body. She's still waiting on her test to come back. An initial one said it was negative for COVID, but she's gotten some follow-up tests. Anyway, she sought me out and called me to pray with her in the evenings. Her doctor, in fact, had told her, a doctor friend had told her that what she really needed to do right now was to meditate and to take deep breaths and to pray. That was the medical response to this virus that is hard to understand medically. It's hard to respond to medically. And I'm so grateful for the people who are out there trying to figure it out. But it is not something that the medical world has easy answers to. And we are collectively in a new season of living with that reality that doctors don't always have the answers.
Right.
And one of the answers that we're actually hearing now is pray, is meditate. And it felt really good to me that she, knowing that I was a pastor, reached out to me to say, I don't pray, but I want to, I need to, for my health, for my body. Can you pray with me? And so I think there are ways that in this time of being stripped bare, God is showing up. And I don't say that in a glib way, because nobody wants God to show up when you're in pain and not sure if you're going to make it. I mean, that's not where anybody wants to be. But it is sometimes only in the darkness that the light is shining clearly.
Yeah, I think I've had more conversations with people about sitting down and shutting up and listening to God than I have any other kind of conversation. And that and recreation. I mean, we used to talk about, it used to be in the Book of Order, in the Directory for Worship, that one of the means of grace was rest and recreation. So there's a place for this meditation, this prayer, but there's also a place for, I guess we could call it playing. So praying and playing.
Yes. Oh, I love that. And I love the opportunity to give a shout out to our youth director at First Pres for a second, Rachel Little. She's fantastic. And one of the things that she taught us, our team, our faith formation team that leads a lot of small groups for a variety of demographics, was that her folks just wanted to play. So her kids had been on Zoom doing, online learning for hours each day. And so when she got with them, they wanted to play.
Right. They were not going to do another Bible study, another hour-long academic thing for church. They just weren't going to do that.
That's right. And, she was a smart enough pastor, I told her that, to recognize, I'm going to put my content aside and I'm going to meet these kids where they are. And, that's playing the silly, I don't even know. I don't know the silly.
You don't even want to know. Yeah.
But that was good learning for us all. And I do think there's going to be, that's going to be a piece of our return, is just the desire to play and to be together and to enjoy being together.
Yeah. So as we wrap up our time, I'd love to know what you've either read or listened to or seen lately that is giving you life. It doesn't have to be a churchy thing. You've given us a lot of churchy content. If you want to, you can, but I know you're a whole human being. Is there something that that's just given you life lately that you would love to just have other people experience as well?
Well, my son and my husband just received an old school Nintendo. So they're down there playing. They're like this big. They're tiny, and they have like all the old school games on it.
Now, wait, is that giving you life because it's gotten your son and husband out of your hair, or is that giving you life because you're playing Nintendo?
Yeah, a little bit of both, I think. I mean, I could be, I was really good at completing Super Mario Brothers 2, so I can't wait to try it again. And I have also, just enjoyed the music that's out there, and have been enjoying listening to the various videos that these choirs are putting together. It's just really neat. Some of the memes are hilarious. I mean, the meme game is stepped way up during this pandemic.
I didn't think it could get any better.
I know, it's awesome. And also just being outside is really important to me. We have a nice walking path, and that's been something that's great. I did want to mention one churchy book,
please,
that we're doing a small group on right now, and I think it's been great. It's Reverend Paul Lang. He's a Presbyterian pastor in Fargo, North Dakota, but it's a new book called Pilgrim's Compass, Finding and Following the God We Seek.
Nice.
And it's for small groups with small group discussion.
Lovely. Nice.
And it's a really good book. He talks about pilgrimaging in place. So the idea that we don't have to travel to a particular destination, although he takes up some of the history of pilgrimage, which is fascinating, but that we, in our daily discipleship walk, can also experience the transformational movement of encountering God.
If that didn't turn out to be a timely book, probably published just before all of this happened.
Right. Yeah.
Well, that is fantastic. Those are great recommendations. I look forward to you bragging online about beating Super Mario 2 again as an adult. Brian and I have a friend who tells a story about she spent a summer just beating Zelda. So we respect game respects game.
Yeah.
Jamie, thank you so much for your energy, intelligence, imagination, and love. Thanks for taking time to share what you and your colleagues are thinking about this return. We will pray for you by name, you and your colleagues, and boy, we just pray God's blessing over you. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure. I enjoyed the chat.
Thank you.
Thanks.